Hi, everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. So recently, I've been spending a lot of time in the church news archives, which go back to the 80s. And I've known for a long time that there are many unique gems to be found on this website. But it wasn't until recently that I've really started digging into the archives. And it gets me kind of excited because it makes me wonder what else is there. The longer I do this YouTube channel, I keep asking myself, what else is there? Whether it's on the church news archives or elsewhere. So just go to church news, click on the magnifying glass, and you can search the archives for different words and phrases. So I found a couple new things that I want to share with you that I think are really interesting. Some of this will be a review, but it's a good thing to review anyway. And then there's like 2, 3, I can't remember, at least like 2 or 3 new things that I'm just so glad that I found. Okay, so we're looking at this article from May 4th, 2018. The story behind the touching photo of President Nelson meeting a young girl in Jerusalem. Okay, here it is. And I actually didn't know this story, so I just want to read this whole article. It's really short, but it's this part right here that I have highlighted in yellow and red that I want to focus on. That doesn't have so much to do with the story. Okay, Jerusalem, Israel. Let me zoom in. Sitting on large rocks in the shade of the BYU Jerusalem Center, John Ray and Mara Bautista of Tel Aviv watched their daughter Ella, 7, play nearby. A Filipino, Mara came to Israel to find work in 2007. 2 years later, John Ray followed. The couple married almost 8 years ago. Times here have been tough for the family. Mara hasn't worked since Ella was born. Her legal status, as well as Ella's in the country, is uncertain. But today, they're not worried about that. They talk of the opportunity to hear President Russell M. Nelson speak as part of his world ministry tour. Let me just pause right here. I'm starting to think that this was a bigger deal than what we realized for a couple different reasons that I'm about to show you. But in his first year as president of the church, he went on this world tour. And he went to Jerusalem specifically. More on that in just a minute. So something interesting going on here. As Ella runs over to her parents, she also makes a declaration that about the prophet's visit. Quote, "He is going to greet me," she says with certainty. Yes, Ella is told when President Nelson waves to the crowd, it will be like he is greeting you. But the child is resolute in her faith that President Nelson would greet her individually. Less than an hour later, Ella and her parents joined other members of the church's Jerusalem district for a meeting with President Nelson and Elder Jeffrey R. Holland of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Said Elder Holland, quote, "I suspect none of us in this room can understand the significance of this day, ... but we will." This is so fascinating to me. I'm going to explain why in just a little bit, but so President Holland, I've been watching him for a long time, even before starting this channel in 2021. And I've noticed that he likes to drop breadcrumbs. You know, who wouldn't like to drop breadcrumbs when you're at that level? You're in the Quorum of the 12, and you probably know so much more than what the church puts out, like just future plans, for example, like things that they've talked about in their meetings, future plans for the church, or a certain understanding of this prophecy or that or whatever. Don't you think it'd be a little bit hard to stay quiet? Wouldn't you want to kind of like give out hints? I think so. And I know that President Holland is human. The rest of us are. I don't think he's doing anything wrong. He's probably giving breadcrumbs where appropriate. But I don't think that we should ignore this. I'm about to explain why in a minute. I suspect none of us in this room can understand the significance of this day, but we will. Okay. Is there more to that? Well, I found a few other things. Okay, continuing with this article. At the conclusion of the meeting, President Nelson walked up the steps in the center's auditorium shaking hands with members. Then he saw Ella. President Nelson bent down, tenderly placed both hands on the back of Ella's head, and looked at the child in the eyes. Quote, "We will never forget this moment and this day," said John Ray. Now, I don't think that that's necessarily what Elder Holland was referring to. Obviously, it's special anytime you meet a prophet or apostle, or even just like a general authority, a 70, or a general officer of the church. It's always going to be a special event. But it doesn't sound like that's exactly what at the time, Elder Holland is talking about. I suspect none of us in this room can understand the significance of this day. All right, before we move on, here's the picture of President Nelson and Ella. Very special experience for her. I'm guessing that this is her mom right here. Okay, so I wanted to find out, was there anything else, any other clues as to why he would have said that? Well, there's this article. This is Deseret News, published April 14th, 2018. President Nelson cancels visits to local sites, leaves Jerusalem as tensions rise in Middle East. This is by Sarah Jane Weaver. Jerusalem. Hours after the United States Armed Forces ordered a strike on Syria, President Russell M. Nelson cut short his stay. Let me close out of that. President Russell M. Nelson cut short his stay in Jerusalem, leaving the central location of his global ministry tour following conference sessions at the BYU Jerusalem Center. At a time of rising tensions, the message of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is more important than ever, he said Saturday morning from the Holy City. Okay, so it's not like President Nelson goes to Jerusalem all the time. As far as I know, this is the only time that he's gone. And this is one of the first things that he wanted to do when he became president of the church, was go to Jerusalem. And when he does go there, there's these tensions, and he actually had to cut his short trip, or cut his trip short because of the tensions. And I feel like there could be a symbol in that. That could be possibly a theme or a foreshadowing of his presidency. When I hear the term cut short, it instantly makes me think of this scripture. This is Doctrine and Covenants, section 52, verses 10 and 11. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying that this is prophecy. This isn't like a prophecy, but I feel like it's fitting for what happened in this case. It was him and, at the time, Elder Holland. Okay? Let them go 2 by 2, and thus let them preach by the way in every congregation, baptizing by water, and the laying on of hands by the water's side. For thus saith the Lord, I will cut my work short in righteousness. For the days come that I will send forth judgment unto victory. So maybe if there's a symbol to be had in this, with his trip being cut short, the president of the church, as well as a notable apostle, going to Jerusalem at the beginning of his presidency, I think that's kind of interesting, especially with the tensions that were going on that made it so that his trip was cut short. Because here we are in 2024, possibly near the end of his presidency. We don't know how much longer he's going to live, but he just turned 100. We have this very unusual war that's taken place. It started October 7th, 2023, and it's still ongoing. And it seems like we're reaching a new phase where it's going to shift from Hamas to Hezbollah. And for all we know, maybe it'll turn into World War III. Don't know. So I think that's interesting. Let's continue. Follow the Deseret News as we chronicle President Russell M. Nelson's travels through 7 countries around the world. Now, I had read this article before. It's not like this is new, but I'd never made this connection that this big global ministry tour that he did right when he became president of the church, it was to 7 countries. And I feel like that's significant because we've noticed that President Nelson does a lot of things in 7s. I have a spreadsheet called Prophets 7s. You can access my spreadsheets anytime. The link is in the description box of each video. And here's the newest item is he went to 7 countries on his global ministry tour. These are the cities and the countries. Let me zoom in. And I put my references over here to the right if you need to verify that. Okay, so he went to London, England, Jerusalem, Israel, Nairobi, Kenya, Harare, Zimbabwe, Bengaluru, India, Bangkok, Thailand, and Hong Kong, China. 7 different countries. Now, if you're new to the channel, if you don't know what I'm talking about, we've noticed that typically he'll do things where like he'll repeat like a word or a phrase 7 times. So, or he'll do something in 7. So the first one that I have on here is from October 2017. He asked the question, what would your life be like without the Book of Mormon? This was a general conference talk called The Book of Mormon. What would your life be like? What would your life be like without it? October 2017 general conference. And he included 7 answers from people to that question. 7. I have them color coded right here. Okay, 7. Later on, for 7 conferences in a row, he did this thing where he would bring up the Salt Lake Temple and then use it as an object lesson, seemingly to help us get prepared for the second coming in the millennium. But he did it for 7 conferences in a row. Here are the conferences, and then here's the name of the talk where he did that. And then he stopped. 7 in a row, and then he stopped. Here, what's this one? This is October 2021 General Conference. The name of the talk is The Temple and Your Spiritual Foundation, and he repeats him or his or the Lord. He like refers to the Lord 7 times. And there's more. The other notable thing is that for some reason, starting on the 21st of September, 2023, which was the 200-year anniversary of the Angel Moroni meeting with Joseph Smith, he started this thing where for 7 months in a row, he would do a social media post and repeat a word or phrase 7 times. So the first one in this series, the phrase or the name was the Book of Mormon. Okay, here it is. I have it color-coded 7 times. 7 days later, he did it again on the 28th of September, and he repeated the word conference 7 times. Okay. And then after that, he did it 1 time per month for 7 months in a row. The 7th month was March of 2024, and that's the month that the Kirtland Temple came back into the church. Don't know if it was pointing to that. I have no idea. And then it stopped in April. I figured that it was probably done. But then it continued back up in May, in June. But then after that, it stopped. I was wondering if he was going to do another set of 7, which would have taken us to November. But it doesn't look like that's happening. So still keeping my eye on it. But, okay, so the point is he does a lot of things with 7s. And this is the newest one. He started his presidency by going to 7 countries. Very interesting. All right, continuing. President Nelson and Elder Holland offered messages of hope from the grounds of the BYU Jerusalem Center. Elder Holland said President Nelson, quote unquote, decisively and instantly determined that his first major gesture beyond LDS Church headquarters would be to visit Jerusalem. So that's kind of significant. Again, we're trying to understand what did President Holland mean when he said, I suspect none of us in this room can understand the significance of this day, but we will. Well, it may just be the fact that President Nelson is focused on Jerusalem, in that Jerusalem and Israel and the Jews are going to play a bigger and bigger role as we approach the second coming. And then obviously in the millennium, because we're going to have this great conversion event when Christ comes to the Mount of Olives. Okay, continuing. This is President Holland. He wanted to walk where the Savior walked and stand where the prophets have stood and feel what we all feel here. The rich, powerful influence of this land is palpable. I think he wanted to personally, as well as for the, I think he wanted that personally as well as for the church, end quote. President Nelson said he had symbolic reasons for planning the global trip as he did. I'm going to have to put this on a spreadsheet. It's just more evidence that he does things in a symbolic way. We know that we're reading this right now, and then we know that he did that for the hashtag Give Thanks video message. He said that he received specific revelation for how long the video was supposed to be, when it was supposed to be put out, the day it was supposed to be put out. So I don't think there's a whole lot that he does that's arbitrary. Okay, quote from President Nelson. We wanted to start in Jerusalem to fortify ourselves with the message of the Lord Jesus Christ right from its very inception, here where he was born, where he lived, where he ministered, and where he was crucified. This message is for all of God's children. Okay, and then this article repeats what at the time Elder Jeffrey R. Holland said. I suspect none of us in this room can understand the significance of this day, but we will, said Elder Holland. Okay, let's move on from that. I think there's more going on here. Okay. Let me just point this out. So this is church news. Elder Holland shares miracles that made the BYU Jerusalem Center possible. This was published the 18th of October, 2019. And it has a picture of him and President Nelson at the BYU Jerusalem Center with the Dome of the Rock in the background. But here you have two prophets. You have two prophets in Jerusalem, and this is the first place that President Nelson wanted to go once he became president of the church. Two prophets. But this right here is talking about the BYU Jerusalem Center. We'll talk about the two prophets in a minute. At 6:45 a.m. on November 14th, 1985, President Gordon B. Hinckley, chairman of the executive committee of the BYU Board of Trustees, received an urgent phone call from BYU President Jeffrey R. Holland. President Holland had received a series of phone calls through the night about trouble in Jerusalem regarding the construction of the BYU Jerusalem Center for Near Eastern Studies. Tensions were high in Israel for a variety of reasons, and talk of war was in the air. Politically, there was a 60-60 deadlock between two halves of a coalition in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. And then it talks about how the situation was resolved. And then Elder Holland says, many commented that a political miracle had happened. I also say a miracle happened, but it wasn't technically a political one, and it didn't come from Jerusalem. It didn't come from London. It didn't come from Washington, D.C. or New York City. The miracle that morning came from the fourth floor of the Salt Lake Temple, where a prophet, seer, and revelator prayed safety and protection down upon something the Lord wanted done in that land. That was one of 33 miracles, large or small, that happened to make the BYU Jerusalem Center possible. You guys, it is my belief that the BYU Jerusalem Center can become a temple in Jerusalem. Possibly one of many. There doesn't just have to be one in the city of Jerusalem. We have a couple different cities now that have more than just one temple, and that's probably going to continue in the future. I'm going to talk about that more in just a minute. There's always this like weird opposition to like, no, the BYU Jerusalem Center can't become a temple, or it's not supposed to be the temple. We'll get into that in just a minute. Okay, explaining some of the pivotal moments in the history of the BYU Jerusalem Center, Elder Holland began by telling of President Harold B. Lee's visit to Jerusalem in September 1972. The first visit to the Holy Land by a prophet in 2,000 years. And of course, that is excluding, before him, there had been apostles that have gone to Jerusalem. First, he had Elder Orson Hyde, who went there to dedicate it. But as far as like the prophet, the senior apostle, the prophet, this is the first time in 2,000 years. And this is one that I was missing on this spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is called Prophets Travel. And I'm attempting to take note of any time that a prophet or apostle goes to these sacred sites. So in blue, you have Israel. In red, you have sacred sites here in the United States, like Adamant, Far West, Independence, Missouri. Okay, so I didn't have this one. The first prophet or senior apostle in 2,000 years to visit the Holy Land. So this is new. I have all the other, here's another, this is an apostle, Elder John A. Widsoe, who went in 1933, and you have others, so you can go back in time. And then there's also the more recent ones when you scroll up. The most recent one that I'm tracking was last year. It was Elder Dieter F. Uchtdorf of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He went on the 19th of April. And then before that, you had Elder Cook in 2019, Elder Bednar 2019, and then here's President Nelson and Elder Holland in 2018. So as you can see, we do have a lot of prophets and apostles going to Israel, maybe more frequently than what you realize. And I think that's something to note. All right, continuing. He then spoke of President N. Eldon Tanner's mandate in 1979 to acquire what seemed to be an impossible property on Mount Scopus, the location where the BYU Jerusalem Center currently stands, overlooking the Mount of Olives, the Kidron Valley, and the Old City. And actually, Mount Scopus is part of the same mountain ridge as the Mount of Olives, but it's like two separate mounts, quote unquote. Okay, while the church was successful in acquiring the land in a building permit, quote, every possible opponent came out against the project, end quote. Which I have that highlighted because that's exactly what we experience with so many temples. There's so many temples that when it's announced, you have opposition within the local community that come out against it. They want to stop it, or they want to change the look of the temple. They have problems with the spires or whatever. So that's something that the BYU Jerusalem Center shares in common with a lot of our temples. Intense opposition. All right, continuing. One such battle occurred when the Israeli government required a non-proselyting agreement to continue construction. During a special meeting on July 31st, 1985, the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles counseled on how to move forward. One of the brethren read from MORMON chapter 3, verse 16, noting that earlier prophets had been forbidden to preach the gospel and asking if the church was... Noting that earlier prophets had been forbidden to preach the gospel and asking if the church was again willing to stand as an idle witness in Jerusalem. So have you ever thought about that? That the BYU Jerusalem Center, the Jerusalem District, and other congregations, they're standing as an idle witness. And that would include all these different trips by prophets and apostles as well. Standing as an idle witness. Ever since the 80s. That's when the BYU Jerusalem Center was dedicated and put into service. Okay, continuing. It seemed to be a message from heaven itself, Elder Holland said, and the brethren signed the agreement. All students, travel visitors, and local members have loyally abided by its non-proselyting restrictions for more than 30 years. Later on, it says, at the end of his address, Elder Holland emphasized 4 of the many lessons he learned from the miracles of the BYU Jerusalem Center. Quote, and I don't use the word miracle lightly, he said. The Lord can do his own work. Quote, he would like us to help. Very often he needs us to help, but I testify in this case and many others, the Lord can do his own work. He did his own work there. So you guys, the BYU Jerusalem Center, it's no small thing. Okay, but this is really what I wanted to point to. Talking about breadcrumbs and President Holland and this whole thing. President Nelson, Elder Holland going to Jerusalem, going to the BYU Jerusalem Center, saying, I suspect none of us in this room can understand the significance of this day, but we will. Well, look what he says here. Okay, the full potential of the BYU Jerusalem Center is still unrealized. So You'll have to come up with some answer to that. Why is it still unrealized? It's doing exactly what it was constructed to do. Right? Okay, quote, I don't know what it will mean a generation after we're gone or what future purposes the Lord will have for it, but I hope students from all over the world can be blessed by it. My testimony to you is that the Lord wanted that center built and has it there for great purposes that we now see only dimly. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. This is Deseret News, Mideast Prophecies Wow BYU Audience. This is based on this like lecture or talk by Victor Ludlow. Who is that? He is an emeritus religion professor at BYU in Provo, Utah, and the author of several books on the book of Isaiah, most notably Isaiah, Prophet, Seer, and Poet. Ludlow is a scholar on Isaiah. Besides his Isaiah, Prophet, Seer, and Poet, he also wrote Unlocking Isaiah in the Book of Mormon. He also wrote Unlocking the Old Testament and Principles and Practices of the Restored Gospel. Ludlow has served in many callings in the LDS Church, including multiple times as a bishop and a president of the church's Germany Frankfurt mission from 1983 to 1986. Okay, so he's not a general authority. I think that we always need to take that into account, but I do like what he says here. So first, in green, regarding temples, Ludlow dispelled a myth that the church would convert the Jerusalem Center into a temple. Quote, it was not planned or designed to be converted into a temple. It's absolutely and categorically false. It was never on the agenda. But that doesn't mean it couldn't happen, end quote, Ludlow said, sparking laughter. Ludlow said he wouldn't be surprised if a separate building was built. He likes a site currently, a parking lot with weeds located in the Armenian section of the old city of Jerusalem on Mount Zion. Quote, but the brethren haven't come and asked for my opinion yet, end quote, Ludlow said. And here's the thing, you guys. I've been talking about the BYU Jerusalem Center since the beginning of my channel. And there's always all these like anecdotes of this person said that, my professor said this, President Faust said that, all these like different things. Number one, those people are not God. They are not the Lord. Secondly, a building does not have to be built initially to be a temple to become a temple. Do you know how I know that? Because I have a spreadsheet of all these different temples that were originally built to be something else. In the case of the Vernal, Utah temple, it was originally the Uinta Stake Tabernacle, but it was turned into a temple in 1997. The Priorvej Chapel in Copenhagen, Denmark, became a temple. It was originally built to be a chapel. The Manhattan, New York temple was originally a multi-purpose stake center. The Provo City Center temple was originally the Provo Tabernacle. And then we have this upcoming temple that is currently a commercial building. It's not even like a religious building. It's just like a generic commercial building. And I guess it's been purchased by the church, and it's going to become the Brussels, Belgium temple. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what people think the center is supposed to be. It's serving its current purpose. That's part of the plan. But at any time, it can be turned into a temple. And you might say, well, you can't put a baptismal font in there. How do you know that? And how do you know that it needs one? Because beyond all this, beyond it not needing to be built to be a temple in the first place, there are different types of temples than what we currently have. All the temples that we have right now are for ordinance work. You have a baptistry, you have endowment rooms, you have sealing rooms, you have the celestial room. But if we look at church history, did you know that Kirtland was supposed to have 3 temples? So you had the house of the Lord proper, which is the one that was built and still stands to this day. But there was also going to be 2 other temples. one for the presidency of the church, so kind of like the church administration building. And then there was going to be a printing house, but these would have been 3 temples in Kirtland. Furthermore, in New Jerusalem, or the city of Zion in Independence, Missouri, it was going to have 24 temples. And I know that they're temples. Again, people like to play with words and say, well, no, they're buildings. No, they're not. They're temples. This is the Joseph Smith Papers. It's a collection of primary sources. These are the original plans for the city of Zion. When you flip to the back, it says the names of the temples to be built on the painted squares. And then it gives like the names. So these are in groups of 3. So for example, numbers 4 through 6, like 4, 5, 6, the Holy Evangelical House for the High Priesthood of the Holy Order of God. Numbers 1, 2, and 3, the House of the Lord for the Elders of Zion, and ensign to the nations. Let's look at, here's temples 16, 17, and 18. House of the Lord for the teachers in Zion, messenger to the church. Temples 13, 14, and 15. House of the Lord for the deacons in Zion. Helps in government helps in government. And that's so they're in these like groups of 3, and they're seemingly, you have these sets of 3 for different offices of the priesthood. So here's the original plan, but then it was revised. And this is the plan as of right now, unless it gets changed. But here's the revised city plat. You have these temples on the east, on the eastern block for the Aaronic priesthood, and the ones on the west for the Melchizedek priesthood. So these would not be, maybe some of them would, but it doesn't seem that most of these would be the type of temples that we think of today. They would be multi-purpose buildings. So you'd probably have one that'd be like a church administration building / temple. And why can't that be the BYU Jerusalem Center? And then later on, the actual temple that we all think about as the third temple later be built on the Temple Mount. I've also done a video about the Dome of the Rock, why can't that be converted into a temple? What says that it has to be? Now, there is one thing. There is Ezekiel's temple, but when you read James E. Talmage, he talked about the fact that he didn't know if that revelation was like literally supposed to be fulfilled, or if it was just kind of like a vision for the future of having a temple again and its greatness being back in Jerusalem. So there is that. So maybe you will have the actual like Ezekiel's third temple built. We'll just have to wait and see if that takes place. But initially, why can't it be the BYU Jerusalem Center as like an administrative or like a headquarters temple? So, okay, later on, he continues, when will 2 prophets come to the Holy Land? It's already happening. It's a common reality to people in the Middle East, Ludlow said. Ludlow tells students at BYU Jerusalem they are in the right place if they want to meet a general authority. The top place to meet one of the brethren is church headquarters. The second is Provo, specifically the Missionary Training Center. The third is the Holy Land. Quote, there is something to be felt there. They see them all the time. End quote. Before the Battle of Armageddon can take place, Lolo said, a change in the social and economic environment needs to take place. Well, there's been a lot of that going on the last couple of years. There's been a lot. And I tend to think that this is the final war that is playing out right now. It obviously isn't at its crescendo, but things could happen very quickly. Let's see. Was there anything else? I just need to double check. Oh yeah, let's not forget that you had 2 prophets meet with the prime minister of Israel, the one who's currently the prime minister during this war. So I don't think that we should discount that. And on that trip at the BYU Jerusalem Center, Benjamin Netanyahu didn't go for this, but a lot of these other people in this picture did. At the BYU Jerusalem Center, there was a talk that was given by Jeffrey R. Holland, and here's the transcript. So here's a prophet preaching to the Jews in Jerusalem. Let me just show you some of the highlights. He talks about the fact that there was a scattering and a dispersion. He brings up the Book of Mormon and what the Book of Mormon says about the Jews. He says, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints represents a remnant of the tribe of Joseph, which our patriarchal lines go back principally to Ephraim and Manasseh. In that, in such a covenantal relationship, modern prophets have played a role in the gathering of the Jews to their homeland. Later, following the dedication of the first Latter-day Saint temple, so the Kirtland temple, the true, third temple, really, built in the tradition of, but not with the luxury of the Temple of Solomon, the young prophet Joseph Smith, by then 30 years of age, was visited by a series of Old Testament prophets who appeared and initiated the fulfillment of many of the promises we have been referring to today. One visitor was the prophet Elijah, in fulfillment of the ancient promise recorded by Malachi. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Later, he lets these Jewish people know that Moses came to the Kirtland temple. And on top of that, the world-changing appearance of Moses, father of Israel's first return to the promised homeland, he tells them that it's under his authority that this is happening, and talks about Orson Hyde's 1841 mission to Jerusalem, which was the first of several dedicatory prayers to dedicate the land for the return. It wasn't just Orson Hyde. There's a paper on BYU's website that talks about the different dedications that took place, but I also have them here on my spreadsheet. So go back to 1841. So here you have Orson Hyde, and then the next one was 1873. This was Elder George A. Smith of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. If I could spell that right. You guys, I'm not a robot, so sometimes I make mistakes. Oh, sorry, no. This was President George A. Smith, first counselor in the first presidency, and then Elder Lorenzo Snow, and also Elder Albert Carrington. That was 1873. And then you have 1898, Elder Anthony H. Lund. 1902, Elder Francis M. Lyman. And then James E. Talmage of the Quorum of the 12 in 1927. And then Elder John A. Widsoe in 1933. So those were the different dedicatory events to dedicate the land for the return. Okay. So anyway, again, answering this question, I suspect none of us in this room can understand the significance of this day, but we will. I think there's just so much to it. I think it has to do with the two prophets. I think that the two prophets represent just all these prophets and apostles that have been going to Israel. If it is literal, then so be it. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But this could be the fulfillment, or maybe the capstone event when President Nelson and Elder Holland went to Jerusalem at the beginning of his presidency, during which this war has started, and going to a place that could very well become a future temple. President Nelson has said that this is the final phase. He has said that this is the last half of the ninth inning, that we're in the latter part of the latter days. It feels like both of them are being preserved. Like they could have died before now, especially President Holland. There's just a lot of things going on here. So starting his presidency, going to Jerusalem, I don't think it's any small thing. And maybe we'll know even more when this is all said and done, just how special this visit was. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.